Why, that the old chap's assailant, whoever he was, dogged him along the gallery as soon as he entered, seized him when he got to the open doorway, and flung him through, clear as noonday. One of the group, a rather older man than the rest, who was leaning back in a tilted chair, hands in pockets, watching Sackville Bonham smilingly, shook his head and laughed a little. "You're taking something for granted, Sacky, my son," he said. "You're adopting the mason's tale as true. But I don't believe the poor man was thrown through that doorway at all. Not I." Bryce turned sharply on this speaker, young Archdale, a member of a well-known firm of architects. "You don't?" he exclaimed. "But Warner says he saw him thrown." "Very likely," answered Archdale, "but it would have all happened so quickly that Warner might easily be mistaken. I'm speaking of something I know. I know every inch of the cathedral fabric. Ought to, as we're always going over it professionally. Just at that doorway, at the head of St. Rita's stair, the flooring of the clerestory gallery is worn so smooth that it's like a piece of glass, and it slopes. Slopes at a very steep angle too, to the doorway itself. A stranger walking along there might easily slip, and if the doorway was open, as it was, he'd be shot out and into the space before he knew what was happening." This theory produced a moment's silence, broken at last by Sackville Bonham. "Warner says he saw a man's hand, a gentleman's hand," insisted Sackville. "He saw a white shirt cuff, a bit of the sleeve of a coat. You're not going to get over that, you know. He's certain of it." "Warner may be as certain of it as he likes," answered Archdale almost indifferently. "And still he may be mistaken. The probability is that Warner was confused by what he saw. He may have had a white shirt cuff and the sleeve of a black coat impressed upon him, as in a flash, and they were probably those of the man who was killed. If, as I suggest, the man slipped, and was shot out of that open doorway, he would execute some violent and curious movements in the effort to save himself, in which his arms would play an important part. For one thing, he would certainly throw out an arm to clutch at anything. That's what Warner most probably saw. There's no evidence whatever that the man was flung down." Bryce turned away from the group of talkers to think over Archdale's suggestion. If that suggestion had a basis of fact, it destroyed his own theory that Ransford was responsible for the stranger's death. In that case, what was the reason of Ransford's unmistakable agitation on leaving the west porch, and of his attack, equally unmistakable, of nerves in the surgery? But what Archdale had said made him inquisitive, and after he had treated himself, in celebration of his freedom, to an unusually good lunch at the club, he went round to the cathedral to make a personal inspection of the gallery in the clerestory. There was a stairway to that gallery in the corner of the south transept, and Bryce made straight for it, only to find a policeman there, who pointed to a placard on the turret door. "Closed, Doctor, by order of the Dean and Chapter," he announced, "till further orders. The fact was, sir," he went on confidentially, "after the news got out, so many people came crowding in here and up to that gallery that the Dean ordered all the entrances to be shut up at once. Nobody's been allowed up since noon." "I suppose you haven't heard anything of any strange person being seen lurking about up there this morning?" asked Bryce. "No, sir, but I've had a bit of a talk with some of the vergers," replied the policeman, "and they say it's a most extraordinary thing that none of them ever saw the strange gentleman go up there, nor even heard any scuffle. They say, the vergers, that they were all about at the time, getting ready for the morning service, and they neither saw nor heard. Odd, sir, ain't it?" "The whole thing's odd," agreed Bryce, and he left the cathedral. He walked round to the wicket gate which admitted to that side of Paradise, to find another policeman posted there. "What? Is this closed too?" he asked. "And time, sir," said the man. "They'd broken down all the shrubs in the place if orders hadn't been given. They were mad to see where the gentleman fell. Came in crowds at dinner time." Bryce nodded and was turning away when Dick Bewery came round a corner from the deanery walk, evidently keenly excited. With him was a girl of about his own age, a certain characterful young lady whom Bryce knew as Betty Campany, daughter of the librarian to the dean and chapter, and therefore custodian of one of the most famous cathedral libraries in the country. She too was apparently brimming with excitement, and her pretty and vivacious face puckered itself into a frown as the policeman smiled and shook his head. "Oh, I say, what's that for?" exclaimed Dick Bewery. "Shut up! What a lot of rot, I say! Can't you let us go in just for a minute?" "Not for a pension, sir," answered the policeman good-naturedly. "Don't you see the notice? The dean would have me out of the force by tomorrow if I disobeyed orders. No admittance, nowhere, nohow. But law bless you," he added, glancing at the two young people, "there's nothing to see, nothing, as Dr. Bryce there can tell you." Dick, who knew nothing of the recent passages between his guardian and the dismissed assistants, glanced at Bryce with interest. "You were on the spot first, weren't you?" he asked. "Do you think it was really murder?" "I don't know what it was," answered Bryce, "and I wasn't first on the spot. That was Warner, the mason. He called me." He turned from the lad to glance at the girl, who was peeping curiously over the gate into the yews and cypresses. "Do you think your father's at the library now?" he asked. "Shall I find him there?" "I should think he is," answered Betty Campany. "He generally goes down about this time." She turned and pulled Dick Bewery's sleeve. "Let's go up into the clerestory," she said. "We can see that, anyway." "All so close, miss," said the policeman, shaking his head. "No admittance there neither. The public firmly warned off, so to speak. I won't have the cathedral turned into a peep show. That's precisely what I heard the dean say with my own ears. So, closed." The boy and the girl turned away and went off across the close, and the policeman looked after them and laughed. "Lively young couple, that, sir," he said. "What they call healthy curiosity, I suppose. Plenty o' that knocking round in the city today." Bryce, who had half turned in the direction of the library, at the other side of the close, turned round again. "Do you know if your people are doing anything about identifying the dead man?" he asked. "Did you hear anything at noon?" "Nothing but that there'll be inquiries through the newspapers, sir," replied the policeman. "That's the surest way of finding something out. And I did hear Inspector Mitchington say that they'd have to ask the Duke if he knew anything about the poor man. I suppose he'd let fall something about wanting to go over to Saxonsteade." Bryce went off in the direction of the library, thinking. Newspapers? Yes, no better channel for spreading the news. If Mr. John Braden had relations and friends, they would learn of his sad death through the newspapers and would come forward. And in that case... "But it wouldn't surprise me," mused Bryce, "if the name given at the Mitre is an assumed name. I wonder if that theory of Archdale's is a correct one. However, there'll be more of that at the inquest tomorrow, and in the meantime let me find out something about the tomb of Richard Jenkins or Jenkinson, whoever he was." The famous library of the Dean and Chapter of Wrychester was housed in an ancient picturesque building in one corner of the close, wherein day in and day out, amidst priceless volumes and manuscripts, huge folios and weighty quartos, old prints and relics of the medieval ages, Ambrose Campany, the librarian, was pretty nearly always to be found, ready to show his treasures to the visitors and tourists who came from all parts of the world to see a collection well known to bibliophiles. And Ambrose Campany, a cheery-faced, middle-aged man with book-lover and antiquary written all over him, shock-headed, blue-spectacled, was there now, talking to an old man whom Bryce knew as a neighbour of his in Friary Lane, one Simpson Barker, a quiet, meditative old fellow, believed to be a retired tradesman who spent his time in gentle pottering about the city. Bryce, as he entered, caught what Campany was just then saying. "The most important thing I've heard about it," said Campany, "is